Welcome to One on One. I am your host, Jimmy Olson, and I get the opportunity. I know I've been able to chat with him once before, but we're going to play a little catch up because it's been a while. He is the host of the show Full Circle Classic Jesus Music, which, I mean, of course, for me is what I grew up on, and it's a fantastic show to listen to. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome with me Jerry Bryant. Jerry, how are you, brother?
Hey, Jimmy, it's good to talk to you. Yes, I'm doing well. And you pretty much got the title down, except I don't have the word classic in there.
That's right. It's just Full Circle Jesus Music. But
the idea that someone gave me for the show a few years ago is that going kind of a circle, full circle back to where it all began.
Mm-hmm.
But my friend Phil Kagi said, well, you can use my song Full Circle if you'd like. I was really blessed to let him letting me use that theme, and his music is a part of the opening. But ideally, it's going back to the classics, the vintage music of where it all began back in the late 60s, early 70s. And the show that I do, we're up to about 255 hours now, 255 episodes. It really features the music primarily of the 70s and 80s when we were just discovering this whole genre. I don't think it was about record albums at the time or promotion, because many of my artists started out just traveling around in a van, pulling over and playing music in a park and leading people to Jesus, and then either sleeping in the van or in the church basement, eating potluck if the pastor offered it to them. It wasn't a lot of promotion involved, and we did it, taking it to the streets, as the old song goes.
That's right.
So that music is really our legacy, our heritage, and I'm afraid that if we aren't careful, we could lose track of our history, as we get into some of the new styles of music. And my goal is really to take people back to where it began, let them see the roots, and I think that's an honoring thing to do, remembering the roots and where it all came from, and that's what Full Circle Jesus music does.
Well, it's kind of like almost the old saying where it says, remember where you came from. Never forget that. It kind of helps keep you grounded.
It does.
And before we get too far along, one thing I do, let's talk about the show here for a little bit. But you have kind of done a twist on that, and it's been this way for a few years, but it is all listener supported. And if a person even wants to actually, sponsor an entire show, they can. How can a person go about? And I mean, if you're willing to share, I mean, what would it be for a person to, sponsor a episode of Full Circle?
Well, thank you for asking. That's really probably the first time anyone's asked that of all the many years I've done the show. And I'll just throw this in as a backtrack. I started in 1972 with a show called Jesus Solid Rock. Jesus was the solid rock, is the solid rock. I just shortened it, Jesus Solid Rock. It ended up being on 100 radio stations from coast to coast back in those days, 70s and 80s and 90s. I put it down and I thought, I'm done with radio. But someone said, well, what are you going to do with all those classic oldies? And that's how one day I realized that I had a gold mine with all these songs that people hadn't heard or had forgotten. And so I, from the very beginning, have made an effort not to make it a money-making event. It isn't a money-making event. I don't raise support for my income. I do it to, pay the bills for anything that has to do with the internet or equipment or whatever. Listener supported, I usually a couple of times during the program would just give an address and saying, if you donate, it's tax exempt through Giving Fuel, and everything that you give will go toward the program, whether it's a $5 gift one time, a $500 gift one time, versus every month. And I do have people who are doing $50 a month or $10, and that all adds up. I think you'd laugh if you realized how little comes in. To this time, I think there's only one artist from back in the 70s and 80s that's ever contributed. And I play all their music and promote their ministries. But see, I don't look to one person or one group.
Right.
Anybody that believes in this and wants to be a supporter, they can go to fullcirclejesusmusic.com. And at fullcirclejesusmusic.com, up in the top, there's a donate button. And there's where you can do your electronic giving, as well as you can mail it in. I do have some people mail it in because my address is on the Facebook page as well as on my website. That's pretty much a long answer to what you asked, but it is listener supported.
Well, and which is fine. I mean, that's why I asked, because I mean, again, it's a great show, and I know I listen to it. I'll be honest, I'm a little behind. I'm trying to play catch up again. But I mean, the interviews, the music, I mean, all the stories, not just the stories that you hear from the artists, but even the stories that you have, because going back to where things started with your radio show, Jesus Solid Rock, you were actually promoting shows in Carbondale, Illinois.
That's my hometown. At Southern Illinois University, I started the first broadcast on a rock station, 1 hour on a Sunday morning. Well, that station kicked me off because I was talking too much about Jesus is the only way. And I said, well, I'm just repeating his words. He says he is the only way. But when they were playing Timothy Leary and Baba Ramdas, it just didn't fit in well. So they kicked me off. Well, the local rock station, 50,000 watt station, decided I could come on Sunday night. It turned out to be about a 4 or 5 hour show during many of those years, from 72 to 92.
Wow.
And I just played the music and traveled to go places and get albums. And I was heard all over that area. Then we went syndicated into these 100 stations in a time where there were probably only 3 or 4 shows playing classic Jesus music. It wasn't classic at the time, of course. It was with the music of that era. And along with that, people said, well, there's this band traveling. You need to go ahead and maybe bring this group in or something. I never thought about doing concerts. My first concert was with Honey Tree. My next one was Paul Clark. And we did it at a little Christian coffee house in Carbondale, right on the strip, called the Upper Room. And then eventually we had our 10th anniversary, 20th anniversary concerts at the Big Arena downtown, the big basketball arena, big banners, and all this stuff. Or we went over to the Marion Civic Center, and sometimes I would sell that out because it was just new and I was pioneering it. It was just a lot of fun being there. I tell people on the show, the reason it's real is because I was there. I'm telling you how it was. I saw it with my own eyes.
Absolutely. It's one thing to say, to talk about it, but it's something completely different when you can say, but I was there. I was watching this happen. And I was even part of, I mean, you could even say that you were part of this, part of, getting things kind of off the ground, at least in that area that you were in Carbondale, Illinois. And I mean, now from there, you ended up moving on and working with Keith Green. And I mean, things just kind of grew for you from there.
Yeah, I have to say the Lord opened the doors, because I didn't know anything about syndication until a guy came along and said, I'm trying to find ways to sell my albums from my bookstore. Why don't you do a show? I'll pay for it. We'll put it on the air on all these stations, and then people will hear the music and they'll order money, order their albums from me. And little did I know that Wendy Distributor out of Kansas City would be so beneficial to my ministry. And then a concert with Keith Green, he comes along, actually came in twice to Southern Illinois University. We hit it off. He said, you know what? I've got this community and I need a pastor, but I'm on the road. Would you come out and pastor the community for me? I didn't think I was going to do that. Didn't want to do that. Next thing I know, he had persuaded me, and the Holy Spirit opened the door to sell everything I had, get in a little van, and move out there and live in Woodland Hills, California with Keith and Melody Green. What a memory. My gosh. so much fun.
Well,
And watching him, write all of his music, and people who would come over to the house, like Dylan would walk in and they'd write songs together. And of course, Bob Dylan eventually played harmonica in one of his songs. And
yeah.
just those kind of things happen. The divine appointments, I call them, Jimmy.
Well, and you seem to continue to get a few of those divine appointments. I mean, even with the interviews that you're able to do for the show. And I mean, I'm sure some of them, make their way into where you are, but I mean, how do you kind of pull the ideas together for each of the shows and who to talk to? I mean, is it just like an open invitation and you're just seeing who kind of comes in, or is there
It
some
is kind of
planning?
orchestrated as an open invitation. I'd never really planned it out too far. Like when I was in the UK, I realized one night that Barry Maguire and the guys from the Byrds were going to have a concert, so I found my way over to the church and interviewed them in the UK. Or if I'm out on the West Coast, I stop by to see a guy and visit with him, and he says, "Oh yeah, this band Parable, you used to play band music from them, and he's in town." And so I sat down and talked with him and got all of his albums out of the trunk of his car. He gave me all fresh albums. Those kind of things are fun. They do come sometimes to Nashville because we do have so much music in Nashville.
Mm-hmm.
I've just been blessed because opportunities will come along. And I do regret I missed a couple, like when Gary Paxton lived in town and Danny Taylor from the really early days. You may not know those names.
Oh, no, I know. In fact, I've actually met Gary a couple times because he worked with a friend of mine who records actually a pastor friend of mine who did a lot in Branson. So yeah.
Well, and unfortunately,
He's a
they
character.
passed on before I got the interview. I had
Yeah.
something scheduled and with Gary and didn't get around to getting to where he was located in Missouri. So when it came an opportunity to record an interview with Randy Matthews, I made a point of driving to Florida just for that interview, only to find out he wasn't willing to do the interview at that point.
Mm.
And his reason was, he said, "I just don't think I've got anything to say, and I'm embarrassed, and I'm just a little nervous about it." I went home. I worked on him. I had my friends work on him, and I drove down a second time, and we had a great interview. And I don't think he regrets it at all, and I don't. And out of that, Son of Dust, I think one of his favorite projects, he released it finally as a digital CD. And I think I had something to do with that. Gary, when Glenn Kaiser was in town 2 or 3 years ago for conferences, and people would come here for the Gospel Music Association week,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't come anymore like that, but they would come in, and then I would do interviews because of that. But with Zoom and other opportunities, I can probably interview just anybody out there. If you have somebody you think ought to be on the show and like to hear about their past and what they're doing today, let me know, and I'll try to run them down and make some contact and get them on the show.
Yeah, it seems to be for those of, as you can say, us old radio guys, and the opportunities that have opened up. Speaking of Zoom, because that's opened an opportunity for me to kind of get my show kind of back up and running, and to do these interviews, which it's always hard. I don't know that people understand, of trying to find a studio with the phone with everything ready to go, even though things have gotten easier. Either doing it from Zoom, because you could do it from anywhere. I mean, they could be in the UK and you could be
Right.
at home, or, even taking your phone and just using the voice recorder on there. I mean, it's gotten a lot easier, but it doesn't always mean that it's easy to find them or find the opportunity to have the conversation.
No, we have to just take advantage of these platforms as they come along.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'll just mention to you that a friend of mine, John Thompson, who lives in Nashville, was beneficial to me in that he got my show on iTunes, and I don't even know how to do it, but he did it. Well, out of that, there's all these new formats that come along, and they borrow without asking your permission your show. Well, now I'm on iHeartRadio. I'm on a half a dozen other really well-known formats. I had nothing to do with asking if they would run my program. They just decided they would borrow it and use it. And I'm not in any way regretting that. They don't have to worry about me complaining a bit, because that just broadens the audience of
It's
people who
that.
might,
Go ahead.
who might want to hear the
Yep,
show.
absolutely. Well, and that, I'll be honest, that's how I kind of ran across your show, was through iTunes years ago.
Yeah.
In fact, while I'm sitting at work, and then I'd go, what's this? And I started listening, and I guess you could say the rest is history. But yeah, between iTunes and Google Play and Spotify and iHeartRadio, I mean, I know even for me, the how I distribute my podcast has really expanded and grown, and it's just that many more ways to get out there. Because I mean, with you being on iHeartRadio now, somebody could listen to you on their smart speaker at home. It makes it even easier to listen to the.
Well, surprisingly, Roku even picked me up. Roku's in a lot of television
Mhm.
sets now, and people can listen to me through their TV on Roku, and I didn't have anything to do with it, except God opened the door. And um, I think we need to just pray that God will give us divine appointments. I did try to get on um, the satellite stations because I had some leads there,
Mhm.
but I don't need to be on a paid satellite station. It just would be another way of getting it up. But instead, I've been content with TuneIn and Google Play and Podbean and Castbox, and I can go down the list of the people that these formats, they're looking for content.
Mhm.
And if you got something out there of any kind of quality, I did win some awards for the show because I applied an application. And after I'd won I think it was an Angel Award for best whatever, it was number one in the list. I said, well, I don't need to do that anymore. So I never applied. I'm not looking for, I really want you to hear my heart on this. Jimmy, the joy I have is serving. I love to give away. And maybe Keith was one of the pioneers of giving away his albums, and people didn't like that. They were
Mhm.
trying to make money, but he just said, I don't want to sell the gospel, right? And I've had opportunity. People said, well, why don't you do it this way or that way, and you can make money on it. I just never have done that. Always wanted to stay low and let God open doors that He wants open, minister from the heart. Now, who knows if an opportunity might come along someday? But if you get involved in business transactions and dollars and contracts, you know what happens.
Oh yeah.
There's just so much greed in the heart of man. But you can't argue with a guy who says, "Hey, take it, use it, do what you want with it."
Well, and I mean, you can tell just by listening to the show of how much fun you do have. And again, it's the great memories and the things that you can, really share from your own experience, or the experiences that you're hearing through others. So I mean, over the years, I mean, even going back to Jesus Solid Rock, or even maybe it's with the full circle Jesus music, what was one of the most memorable conversations that you had with an artist or record exec, whoever it was that you interviewed for the show?
Well, I could say maybe there's more memories than we have time to talk about, but I can say talking to Michelle Pilar and having her give her story of how she was broken, had been abused and wounded in her life, and how God redeemed her. And we both were in tears at the end of that interview. That's a highlight. If you want to look it up, there's actually a listing on my page where you can find the list of the show and where she was, or even Google would tell you what show it is. I don't remember off my head. The other one would be second chapter of Acts is Annie Herring. And she said to me once, she said, you're one guy I love to do an interview with because we really get down to it. We really get back to the heart of the matter, which it's all about him.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, by the way, Jesus music. Don't leave out the Jesus, as you hear me say. And I just appreciate that. I mean, I've been honored to have Amy Grant on a couple of times, even recently, and she's really a dear person. And so I've had some great interviews like that. I've had people, though, I remember from listening to the show that I will never forget. The girl that called up, she was stoned when she was listening to my show, but she said when she talked to me on the phone, she lost her buzz, and she got really mad about that. She said, "What did you do to me?" Well, I didn't do anything. I just invited the presence of Jesus, right? And she lost her buzz, got mad, and this is when I was still in Carbondale. She came to see me. I led her to the Lord, baptized her. 20 years later, I just went to see them out in North Carolina where they live now. And I'm still her pastor. And, you know, it's just crazy how it all happened. But that night, God arrested her right where she was, and he took over. I had a guy call up one time. He said, "You just talked about I was going to pull the trigger on this gun on my lap," and I spoke about it right on the air. And he put the gun down and called me up, and we prayed. And those are the things that God will orchestrate. And see, the thing that is so beautiful, I might do a show today that somebody hears 2 years from now, and it's the exact song or word or encouragement they need to stop disaster from coming. You know, this is timeless stuff. The music is timeless. I try not to date it in any way, so that if I were to go on to be with my best friend in his heavenly place, I could have somebody just keep it going, you know? In other words, play the 255 hours as many times as you want. Somebody's not even heard probably all of them yet.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, is what they say. It's. You mentioned earlier the divine appointment, and you know you hear a lot even when you listen to Christian radio. You know that people say it's the right song at the right time. You just never know when that's going to be, when it's going to hit you, and what it's going to say to you. So now, I mean, so with Jesus Solid Rock, which that ran for so many years, and then, I mean, did it take a lot of, I know you said that the people were asking, hey, you got these records, you got this stuff sitting at home, what are you going to do with it? I mean, did it take really a lot of coaxing to kind of get the show off the ground, to get Full Circle rolling? I mean, what was the process to get it up and running?
You know, it's interesting that the National Religious Broadcasters has had something to do with both of my shows. I went to the NRB one year, and this guy said, I'll put you on 100 stations, and then they'll know where to buy the songs, because I'm the guy that's the main distributor. And he was. A Windy distributor was one of the biggest in Kansas City at the time. Well, I was coaxed, invited to go to an NRB, and I went because I thought, well, there might be some swag, some people I can say hi to. You know, you come out with a bag of books and this, that, and the other. And while I was there, I talked to, and bless his heart and may his memory be a blessing, the late Tom Dooley. And Tom encouraged me, prophetically said, I really feel like you've got a radio show that needs to be done. You need to go home and produce it. And I took that as an encouragement from the Lord to go home. And the night that this thing was birthed, my writer, Russell Baum, who has a better memory of all these songs than even I do, so he gives me the shell to work with, the songs and things. I throw in my memories and, you know, share a lot of stuff. But he's just a great resource for me. We were at the last Petra concert, the going away concert for Petra, in Franklin, Tennessee, a suburb of Nashville. And that night we just agreed, let's do this. And I think it was his wife, Annette, that said, why don't you call it Full Circle? And I go, well, yeah, why not? He wrote a script with me. We recorded the first one, and the rest is history. Of course, they did come back 10 years later for a reunion tour and Back to the Rock. And they did that as a DVD, 2-part DVD. I got to be on that and interview them and be interviewed, I guess you might say, as well on that DVD series. But that last night, though, in Nashville was supposed to be the end of it.
Right.
There's so many other versions of Petra that have evolved since then.
Yes, there have. I can. I mean, following them
And
from
that
the beginning
won't go away.
That's right. Well, and then even when they kind of did they brought a lot of when they were really kind of in their heyday, you could say, when they brought Mark Lowry back, but then they actually were touring with Greg X Volz and John Schlitt, who both ended up doing the lead singer duties for Petra. I guess you could almost say the Christian version of Van Halen, when you had the David Lee Roth and the Hagar, depending on which one you liked. But
well, I'll be honest, I'm a little prejudiced before Greg X Volz. These bands had an impact on my life back before I even started doing the radio show. I got to hear Love Song on a radio program, a lady named Catherine Kuhlman, in 71. And it was impactful because I hadn't been walking real close to the Lord back then at the college or the university I was going, Southern Illinois University, and I heard Love Song playing Welcome Back to Jesus. And that got me awakened, I think you might say, awakened again. Well, a couple of days later, I was walking through the parking lot near the pizza place I always went to, and there was this band on a flatbed trailer. They did that pretty often back then. And they were playing music that sounded really good. Great lead singer. Turned out it was a band called E, standing for Eternal.
Mm-hmm.
Greg X Volz was the lead singer. So I walked up to him and told him where I was with God, and he prayed for me right there in that very moment. And I believe that from that moment on, things really turned around. Not knowing I'd be doing a radio show playing Love Song and Greg X Volz and Petra, with a year or two later. Well, of course, it's just how God orchestrates things. They really were instrumental at a time I needed to hear that song, needed to hear that message. So I am always hopeful every time I crack the mic that something I say, a song that I play, will have that same impact on someone who maybe hasn't heard that song for a long, long time, or someone who's never heard that song and doesn't know anything about the history of Jesus music, today's CCM. And if I'm able to touch one person, then I'm grateful for all these years I've been given an opportunity. I don't intend on quitting until it's just, I can't do it anymore, I guess. And I don't see that happening for the next 20 years. So,
well, I mean, yeah, I would say, and the memories that come with it too, because I know when I listen and hear a lot of the songs, and at least for me, that the road trips that you would do, or I mean, I was actually as I was kind of going through for my podcast. Again, you're listening to One on One. I'm your host, Jimmy Olson. I'm chatting with Jerry Bryant, the host of Full Circle Jesus Music. But I noticed that John Schlitt is doing this year. It's him and a couple former White Hart band members. They're doing these backyard concerts. I was noticing that on his website.
Not only that, he's been singing for a while with a guy who is a famous lawyer. He's president.
The Sekulow.
Jay Sekulow is
the Jay Sekulow band.
One of the lawyers for our President Trump.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a band at one time, you may remember these guys. He was a former member of Kansas.
Yep.
Dino Elefante.
Yep.
And his brother Dino. Well, John and our friend were a part of Jay Sekulow's band, and you can actually go and see some really great footage on YouTube of the Jay Sekulow band, and they're both singing lead songs, a lot of the old secular rock and roll numbers from the past,
mm-hmm.
a few Christian songs as well. So I think that John and John have actually plans for doing more stuff together. I'm looking forward to see what they do, and they both have excellent voices.
Well, and
I really like John Elefante.
yeah, I mean, and neither one of them are keeping slow. They've got something going on. I mean, going from Kansas. I mean, again, with the whole, the Jesus music and even into the rock side, because, growing up for myself, you mentioned Glenn Kaiser earlier to Resurrection Band, but then you've got, the Dino Elefante and John Elefante when they did Mastodon. I mean, the list just goes on and on.
Stomps here. I love
Yeah.
that phrase, the rock stomps here.
That's right. Well, fantastic. Jerry, I appreciate your time. I appreciate the conversation. It's always great to catch up. And again, let everybody know if they would want to find out more or even to support an episode of Full Circle Jesus Music, how they can do that.
Well, simply the website is www.fullcirclejesusmusic.com. It's also on Facebook. You can listen on iHeartRadio, TuneIn Radio, Roku, Google Play, Podbean, Castbox, and a lot of Christian radio stations are still playing the show. And why don't you drop me a line and tell me what you want to hear, and I'll do my best to get it on for you.
Well, Jerry, I appreciate it very much. Thank you very much for your time. Ladies and gentlemen, I've been chatting with Jerry Bryant, the host of Full Circle Jesus Music. You've been listening to One on One. I'm your host, Jimmy Olsen.